Good afternoon and viva la fiesta! Only about half of you woke up. Well, let's try that again. On the count of three. 1, 2, 3. Viva la fiesta! Welcome to Flor y Canto, and we like to refer to this as Fiesta Unplugged. And what we're going to do is take you back in time, about almost 200 years now, what Santa Barbara might have looked like and sounded like back around 1830s to 1840s. And at this time, we were under Mexican rule, and Mexico had given out a number of land grants from 4,000 to 48,000 acres. So the people throughout California, Alta California, were living on these great swaths of land and raising cattle, and they're waiting to trade their cattle hides with the ships that would come in from the East Coast and from foreign lands and from Europe. And they were usually coming in once the winter had finished and the ice had melted away, so the people in California could expect the ships to come in the springtime. So let's go back in time to what it might have sounded like, and we're singing a song that was popular in California at that time, named, of course, La Primavera, for springtime. Now, we talked about these trading ships that came in. It's important to realize that at this time, there were no cities and towns, there were no buildings and banks. Everything was just done by barter with the people who lived throughout California on these ranchos. There was maybe 10,000 people at that time, of the white man, so to speak. And on these ranchos, you might have 60 people to maybe 600, that's all, on these huge plots of land. Now, when the ships came in, the people on shore were very, very excited. They built up huge bonfires so that the ships would know exactly where to come into port. And that would also tell all the ranchers and rancho people where to go down on the beach. And they would line up all the ladies. They couldn't wait to find out what was on the trading ships because there was no industry here other than raising cattle. So the ladies looked forward to the beautiful shawls that came from Spain or the hair combs. I'm sorry, not from Spain, but actually China. So we think of them as the Spanish shawls with the silk and the beautiful flowers and the fringe, but they were actually Chinese, traded with the Philippines, and then traded back over here in California for the hides and the tallow. So our next song is something that we call very onomatopoeic, which was typical of the songs of this period. And that was that they sounded like whatever they were trying to emulate. And the songs and the dances of California, many of them came from Europe or by way of Mexico, but most of them were just invented and put together by people in California. They're just unique to California. And these songs were onomatopoeic, and they were describing what life was like on the ranchos, both the songs and the dances. Now, this next song, El Capotin, was a favorite of mine growing up. All the kids used to learn this song, and it talks about a man who's losing his love, and his heart is broken, and it feels as empty as the rain on the roof. And that's what you're hearing is capotin, tin, 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 the sound of the rain on the roof. So choir, take it away.
Yo soy firme para amarte y constante en el querer, que el trabajo a su nombre cuando quiere a la mujer.
Que el trabajo a su nombre cuando empiece a enamorar. Toma vino, se emborracha y se acuesta sin cenar.
Cuéntame, tin, 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 que esta noche va a llover. Cuéntame, tin, 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 que será al amanecer. Cuéntame, tin, 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 que esta noche va a llover. Cuéntame, tin, 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 que será al amanecer. No me mates con pistola ni puñal. Mátame con tus ojitos o esos labios de coral. No me mates con pistola ni puñal. Mátame con tus ojitos o esos labios de coral. Tin, 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 que esta noche va a llover. Cuéntame, tin, 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 que será al amanecer. Cuéntame, tin, 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 que esta noche va a llover. Cuéntame, tin, 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 que será al amanecer.
Now, you can imagine that you're at a party from almost 200 years ago, and one thing that the people in California loved to do was dance. And Santa Barbara, their favorite dance was La Jota, which is the one you're going to see coming up. They were known as incredible dancers, and people who visited at this time talked about seeing the old men, 70, 80 years old, were so spry and nimble at dancing, why they looked like men half their age. So it was very, very impressive for people. Now, one of the places that they would dance would be at a wedding. And one of the most famous weddings in all of California, it was not the Kardashians. It was one of the De La Guerra daughters to one of the agents from the Hides and Tallow Company from Boston. And a young lawyer named Richard Henry Dana was on one of these trading ships, and he came to the wedding of the De La Guerras. It was held at the Mission, and the reception was at the De La Guerra, Casa de la Guerra, and he would have seen all the great renowned dancers of California who came to the party, and he would have seen this dance. And by the way, at that party was when he first saw, or anybody learned about, cascarones, confetti eggs. In those days, they had little bits of paper and maybe of gold, and also perfume. So today, you most likely see like a 9-year-old boy knocking it on other people's, his friends' heads, but back then it was the young woman kind of marking the young men with their favorite scent. But let's hear it for the dancers, and they will do La Jota. Now, we talked about how large the lands that they were living on, the ranchos, 4,000 to 48,000 acres. And they're raising nothing but cattle, some sheep, but mostly just cattle, cattle, cattle. And therefore, these people were on horseback all day long. And if you were the lady of the house, you were cooking and you ran out of eggs or sugar, and you had to borrow some from a neighbor, you'd be on a horse a long time before you got to the next door neighbor to borrow some goods there. So they did become expert horsemen. If you've got any horse people out there, the style that they had wasn't so much controlling the horse by the reins, American style, but a little more like dressage. Because they're on the horse so long, they barely have to do anything, and the horse knows what to do. If they just wave their hat, the horse knows to go to the right or the left, or barely do anything to control the horse. And the people who came through at this time were impressed and talked about how the horsemen of California and Santa Barbara were unsurpassed anywhere in the world, better than the gauchos down in Argentina or the Tartars, that they were so amazing, the control that they had of their animals. Now, our next song talks a little bit about this. It's about one of the cowboys, El Charro, and he's after the boss's daughter.
Okay. Estaba un charro sentado en las franjas de un corral. Estaba un charro sentado en las franjas de un corral. Su mayordomo le dice, no estés triste, Nicolás. Su mayordomo le dice, no estés triste, Nicolás. Necesito buen caballo, buena silla y buen caballo. Necesito buen caballo, buena silla y buen caballo. Su mayordomo le dice, lo que gustes, Nicolás. Su mayordomo le dice, lo que gustes, Nicolás. Esa chica que usted tiene, con ella me de casar. Esa chica que usted tiene, con ella me de casar. Su mayordomo le dice, tiene dueño Nicolás. Su mayordomo le dice, tiene dueño Nicolás. La 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 la. Nicolás se desespera y se quiere desbarrancar. Nicolás se desespera y se quiere desbarrancar. Su mayordomo le dice, de cabeza, Nicolás. Su mayordomo le dice, de cabeza, Nicolás.
All righty, thank you, singers. As we talked about, the ships would come in and they're going to trade for the hides and the tallow. The hides, when they cleared them off, these were huge swaths of leather, and it would weigh about 40, 60 pounds, and they could sell those for $4 a piece, and it was referred to as the California dollar, because remember, there's no towns, there's no banks, there's no cities, there's just people on these ranchos taking care of one another, and when the ships come in, trading out for goods that they are not manufacturing themselves. The Spanish word for cow is vaca, And so therefore, Spanish cowboys would be vaquero. Now, when the Americans show up, they notice this is how the Spanish pronounced it, and especially in California, it was more that kind of a Sevilla accent. So it sounded like a B instead of a V, so vaquero. So you know how Americans mess up all the Spanish, you know, when they go downtown and they're going on Carrillo Street and Castillo Street and Cabrillo Street? Well, they messed up vaquero too. And with that B, what came out for the Americans was buckaroo. So that's where we get the old buckaroo for the old cowboys. Now our next dance coming up is a Spanish waltz. Now you've seen these other dances, and these were the folk dances that they invented in California or that came from Europe or Mexico. And they were just for people, they weren't for show, they were just for our own pleasure. But when the waltz came over, why, this was very interesting, and they wanted to do this, but the padres forbid dancing in a closed position. Father Larry here from the mission is at the party, and he's saying, people, you cannot dance in a closed position. That's very naughty. So instead, these dancers say, don't worry, Father, we're doing the waltz in an open dance position, so we don't need to see you in the confessional. Thank you. Take it away, dancers, for the Spanish waltz. Now, as we mentioned, at this time, 1830s, 1840s, there are no towns to speak of. There are no banks. There's no, other than the people on the ranchos, that's it. So what would happen if you're riding through and you're visiting from maybe Mexico, you've come through the United States on a ship and you've come off into California and you're riding through on your horse, you'd be looking for a hotel and no such animal exists. So you might see another man on horseback, hopefully you speak Spanish, and you go up to him and say, hey, where can a guy hang his hat? And that vaquero would say, follow me. He would take you to the ranches, take onto the ranch, up to the ranchero's house, the hacienda. I, as the ranchero, would greet this complete stranger and say, welcome, stranger. Stay at my house, it's open, everything. My house is your house. Mi casa es su casa. That's where that saying comes from. So the Californians were renowned for this kind of amazing hospitality. And when a visitor came in from the outside, we're actually very interested in them because they have news from Mexico, or perhaps from the eastern part of the United States, or maybe they come from Europe, in which case the woman can't wait to find out what are the latest fashions in Paris. So the hospitality was renowned, and if there was a party, everybody was invited, so everybody was welcome. And we see that in today's Fiesta being replicated with the spirit of Fiesta and the Flower Girls. And now I think our ladies are going to sing a favorite song from back then, Las Blancas Flores. On our parties, what was kind of neat back then was that if you were an old maid, so to speak, you were over maybe 22 and not married, or maybe 18 and not married, you were considered in high regard, not in poor regard. And at the dances, they would be led kind of like an MC, but only for dance. The tequilero would come up and he would announce to the musicians what songs should be done. And then he would look around the room where the ladies were sitting on benches. If say this was the Casa de la Guerra, the grand houses were in a U shape. So the ladies would be along the side in the benches, and he would ask one of the single ladies to come and be his partner and lead off the dance. And this way everybody would feel included. The next dance he would ask for somebody else. Now the men, remember we talked about the men loving their horses, so the men would be with the horses in the opening, and they're sitting on top of their horses. They're still not letting those horses go. And when they see a cute babe, they take off their spurs, lay it across the saddle, come down, and ask the girl to dance. And then when he's done, he's going to get back up on his horse, although the other guys have probably crowded him out, so he's going to have to get his horse repositioned. So this next dance is La Cachucha, and this would be actually a little bit different. This would be for performance or for exhibition as opposed to just dancing for ourselves like a folk dance. So let's take it away, dancers. So when do we party? So we know that we party for a wedding, and we know how far apart all the people are on these large ranches. So that means if we're having the wedding, and you're going to come to the wedding, you're packing out, and you're going to come, and you're going to stay for 3 or 4 days. And the Californians didn't stop partying. Apparently, they'd take a break somewhere around dawn, and then get right up back to dancing again. Kind of sounds a little bit like Isla Vista's carrying on that tradition. But so they did like to party, and so this is why we have such the big celebration with our old Spanish days fiesta with that tradition. The other reason they might party is because, as I mentioned, if you were a visitor and you were passing through California and you were staying at my rancho, I would have my vaqueros go out to all the other vaqueros from the other ranches, and we'd have a party simply because of a stranger. And that's what we continue with our tradition in Fiesta today. Santa Barbara throws a party for itself because you visitors are coming in to check us out. Another reason for something of an interesting celebration would actually be the death of a child, which sounds odd. Not that people were happy and laughing about it, but rather that a child was innocent, and the idea was that he would or she would go straight to heaven. So the family, would be consoled with, we're so rejoicing that your child is in a safe, good, happy place for eternity. Another reason to celebrate would be wash day, where the woman would take all the wash, load it up on an oxen cart, take it to the hot springs, and again, by the time you get there, you can't just wash and turn around after the rinse and go home. So you're going to be camping out there for several days in a ramada that are made. The people will take out their instruments and guitars, and while the wash is going on, or at the end of the day, you will dance and you will sing. So it looks like now the men would like to come forward and have a chance to party, and they will be singing La Pitanza.
Écheme pitanza de vino tequila hasta que la panza se revuelva pila. Écheme pitanza de vino tequila hasta que la panza se revuelva pila. desde por la noche y al amanecer, la noche que noche beber y beber. Desde por la noche y al amanecer, la noche que noche beber y beber. A ver una copa que se me remota, a beber conmigo viene hoy un patriota. A ver una copa que se me grandota, a beber conmigo viene hoy un patriota. Desde por la noche al amanecer, la noche que noche beber y beber. Desde por la noche al amanecer, la noche que noche beber y beber. Écheme pitanza, que vino tequila, hasta que la panza se vuelva papila.
So we talked about the parties, and we talked about the area, the ladies along the sides and the benches, maybe along the back, the guys on the horses, and the musicians are always back in the corner. And that's where we've got our musicians today, and the music that you're hearing under the direction of Dr. James Garcia, otherwise known as Jim. Jim, wave. And our musicians represent the kind of instruments you would have heard at that time, including a Spanish vihuela, the 5-course 10-string guitar, normal everyday guitars, mandolin, guitars, flutes, and violins, and bass. Where's my bass? Scotty back there. So as they played, you noticed something else that was interesting was the songs, a lot of them danced and sang at the same time, which you'll see with this next dance, La Vesuviana, which came by way of Europe. And actually, the title translates to Little Girl from Warsaw, but nonetheless, they danced that and sang that here in Southern California and in Santa Barbara. So we got our dancers out. Ready, aim, fire.
Varsoviana, ¿quién te truco aquí? Yo solita vine a dar aquí. Comadre, cuando vamos a bailar, la varsoviana que van a tocar. Comadre, cuando vamos a bailar, la varsoviana que van a tocar. Varsoviana que van a tocar, comadre, cuando vamos a bailar, la varsoviana que van a tocar. Puro maíz, el pan de maíz sin sal. El pan de maíz, el pan de maíz, el pan de maíz sin sal. Comadre, cuando vamos a bailar, la varsoviana que van a tocar. Comadre, cuando vamos a bailar, la varsoviana que van a tocar. Varsoviana, varsoviana, ¿quién te truco aquí? Yo solita, vine a dar aquí. Comadre, cuando vamos a bailar, la varsoviana que van a tocar. Comadre, cuando vamos a bailar, la varsoviana que van a tocar.
So now we come to the end of our party. As we learned the hospitality of the Californians, everybody was invited. Automatically you had an invitation. And at that time, of course, we would have had, including our padres from the old mission in Santa Barbara. And all the missions at this time only had 2 priests. So we actually have one of our official Franciscans with us, Father Larry. And as they would have done back then, they would have given a special blessing before people were on their way back home. And we're before, well, actually, go ahead. Want to come up? So Father will give a blessing as they might have done 100, 200 years ago. And then what we'll do is go into the last song, which is very special to Santa Barbara. The actual song is about a lost love and, the guy's hurt and he's going to go back home. And it says, adios, adios, amores, goodbye, my friends. But in Santa Barbara, people always sang this at the end of a party, mostly sort of like, goodbye, my friends, I'll see you again next year. It wasn't sad at all. The sentiment behind it was, what a great party, can't wait to see you again. And to send them on their way, they would have a blessing from the friar from the old mission. Today we have Father Larry with us.
So my dear friends, thank you for coming to our little rancho here in Santa Barbara and for celebrating with us on this wonderful occasion. We love you and your family here with us, and you're always welcome to our rancho. So please come back soon, but may you have a safe journey back home. May you go in God's speed, okay? And be safe. And may you be prosperous at your own rancho. And may God bless you. In the name of the Father, and the Son, the Holy Spirit. Amen. Que le vaya bien. Gracias.
Viva la fiesta, viva la fiesta.